Show. Today's show is all about customer service for people with disabilities. We hope to increase your knowledge and raise your comfort level today by providing you with some practical tips for dealing with customers whose needs may be a little bit different than the typical library customer. We have two very special guests today, Barbara Gordon and Bunny Watson. They are both mental health librarians. Welcome, ladies.
Well, thank you for having us, Marian. We're excited to be here today. You know, library services are so important for people with disabilities, and we're pleased that so many of you have shown up to learn more about this topic. We all want to feel successful. Sometimes, but not always, when we work with someone with a disability, difficulties may occur. Barriers to good customer services can arise through lack of communication, physical and/or cognitive limitations, and sometimes even because of our own prejudice and attitudes towards people with disabilities.
I'm glad you brought that up, Barbara, because attitude is the key. And sometimes we don't even understand our own feelings towards people who are different. Our knowledge of people with mental illness and disability may be based on fiction as much as fact. Think about when you were growing up. Did you observe people with a mental illness being treated with contempt? Did your friends or family hide their mental health issues or disabilities behind a veil of secrecy? Did you ever hear people use the terms psycho, nuts, retard, or crip? Did you maybe use those terms yourself? Many of us have, and it can be difficult to change how we really think, even when we know it isn't correct. Now, popular media does play a big role in shaping how we see other people. Historically, people with mental illness or disabilities haven't been portrayed in a positive or hopeful light. A media that continues to portray these populations as dangerous criminals or burdens on society or even a cause for embarrassment only increase the stigma and our own fear. And all of this together combined makes it really difficult for us to understand the issues surrounding it. It can keep us from learning about and from the people we've already labeled, unless you have a personal experience with a disability. So today, we're going to learn about some different ways that we can be empathetic, supportive, and empowering for everybody.
Well, great. Well, let's start out with some questions from our audience.
Is there any hope for people with mental illness?
Oh, the good news is yes, there is hope. Thanks to modern treatment strategies and community support, many people with mental illness are leading active, happy, and productive lives. It's like any other medical condition. Recovery is possible and it is treatable. The bad news is that people face barriers to seeking help. One of the biggest barriers is stigma. In fact, it's estimated that about 2/3 of people who need help don't seek it out for fear of being labeled and stigmatized.
Is there anything I can do for a person with mental illness?
Actually, you can do a lot, starting with how you act and speak. You can create an environment that builds on people's strengths and promotes understanding. As librarians, we're uniquely placed to assist people in the search for reliable information. Information is crucial to the management of mental illness and to be able to enrich those individuals who are struggling with these issues. Libraries offer so many fantastic services and opportunities that would otherwise be unavailable.
I watch the news. Aren't all the mentally ill violent and unpredictable?
Well, you raise an important and valid question. Although most psychiatric disorders are not associated with violence, anxiety disorder, for example, there does not appear to be an increased risk of violence there. And although most people with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or major depression are not violent, the very presence of a disorder is associated with an increased risk of violence. But statistically, mental illness contributes very little to the overall violence in a community. People with mental illnesses, most of them aren't violent, and there's no need to fear them. In fact, someone with a psychiatric disorder is more likely to be the victim as opposed to the perpetrator of a violent crime. Most people with mental illnesses are 2.5 times more likely to be assaulted, mugged, or even raped than the general population. So people with psychiatric disorders are just normal human beings who are experiencing a difficult time, and they need us to have an open mind, compassion, and helpful support.
Why should I care about this? Mental illness doesn't affect me.
Even if you or your family is not directly affected by mental illness, you probably know someone who has been. Estimates are that 1 in every 4 people at least are affected by mental illness. Think about it this way. That means every 4th customer who walks into the library could have a mental illness.
Well, I'm not sure I believe that. Those numbers seem really high. Where'd you get your information?
Those numbers came from NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness. The National Institute of Mental Health also reported those same numbers.
Doesn't mental illness mainly affect the homeless, the addicts, and the poor people?
No, mental illness does not discriminate. It can affect people of all ages, race, religion, or income. And mental illnesses are not the result of a personal choice, a lack of character, or even a poor upbringing. They are medical conditions that often result in a diminished capacity to deal with the everyday demands of life.
Wow, audience, good questions. But now let's switch gears and talk about other types of disabilities. Barbara, can you first define disability for us?
Sure. A person with a disability is someone with either a mental or a physical impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And disabilities can be developmental, physical, or cognitive. People with disabilities live like everyone else, but with more supports. We've changed for the better how we view people with these disabilities, but we still have a long way to go.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. Now let's have some more questions from our audience.
Is a disability a sign of weakness, a character defect, or even a punishment from God?
Absolutely not. Disability is a natural part of the human experience. In fact, people with disabilities constitute the largest minority group, and it's the only group you can join at any time, at birth or later in life, through illness or an accident or even the natural aging process. In fact, look around the room right now. How many of us are at this moment using assistive technology? Glasses, hearing aids, and such.
Don't people with disabilities have a poor quality of life and deserve our sympathy, charity, and pity?
Well, a person's quality of life depends on many factors. The quality of their living conditions, access to community activities, social relationships, and such. In fact, the library can be a focal point of access for people with disabilities.
Aren't people with disabilities a drain on society?
All people have inherent value. Many people with disabilities are contributing members of society. Attitudes have evolved over the years, increasing opportunities for people with mental illness and disabilities. When this happens, we were able to see diversity in schools, workplaces, and the community. When the people with disabilities are able to work and live as freely and independently as they possibly can, they contribute just as much as everyone else.
Should we treat people with disabilities as courageous and brave and inspirational for dealing with their disability?
No. We should treat them like we would treat everybody else, with respect and courtesy. Because people with disabilities are just like everybody else. They're just living their lives. Sympathy can sometimes lead us into being overly nice or accommodating to people with disabilities. So you have to be careful that you're not being patronizing or treating them any differently than you would your other customers. And not everyone with a disability is a sweetheart or a cutie. There are plenty of jerks out there. So don't be afraid to treat a jerk like a jerk. What I mean by that is that we shouldn't tolerate behavior that is rude or inappropriate any more than we would from one of our more typical customers.
Now let's take a look at some practical things you can do to better serve customers with disabilities. Barbara, what is your first tip?
Well, in the library, we know better than to judge a book by its cover, and we should apply that to people too. Be careful not to label or define them by their disability. We'd never classify a book without examining its contents first, would we? We must also remember that the way we speak about things and people can influence the way that we feel, which could potentially influence the way we act. As librarians, we know that words are powerful. Harmful labels can perpetuate negative stereotypes and reinforce attitudinal barriers. That's why we should always use people-first language.
What is people-first language?
People-first language is a reminder to put the person before the disability. We would say, Paul has a cognitive disability, not he's mentally retarded. Or another example, she has bipolar disorder, not she's bipolar. I encourage everyone to visit Kathy Snow's website, disabilityisnatural.com, to learn more about people-first language and other topics relating to disabilities.
Well, that's great information. What are the guiding principles for providing better customer service for people with disabilities?
First, we want to provide excellent service to all our customers, regardless of their abilities. The library is a place where everyone should feel welcome.
But don't library workers have an obligation to limit disruptions by patrons with disabilities?
Of course, we need to ensure a positive library experience for everyone. Don't assume that patrons with problems are automatically going to be your problem patrons. You'll need to handle patron behavioral issues on an individual basis according to library policy.
What can library workers do to create opportunities for success for patrons with disabilities?
Well, first, be sure you are being truly welcoming. Many people with disabilities have been avoided, rejected, or marginalized throughout their entire lives, and the library should be a place where everyone feels truly welcomed.
It's also important that you understand your role. We don't expect you to be mental health professionals. You don't need to diagnose or treat symptoms. Your goal is to provide library services and guidance to customers while maintaining safety. In order to do that, all staff should be able to recognize the signs of escalating crisis. There's an excellent video on the Librarian411 site that shows you how to deal with the crisis in the library.
And as we mentioned earlier, librarians are uniquely positioned to assist people in the search for reliable information. And libraries can also help people access resources within the community. For example, at the San Francisco Public Library, there are signs up in the restrooms that prohibit showering. But then they give a list of places where people can go shower. So by keeping up-to-date information at hand, you can not only make a difference in someone else's life, but you could also educate your patrons as to what they can and cannot expect from their library.
So what do people with disabilities want from the library? What keeps them coming back?
Well, people with disabilities often seek self-help or other resources to help them with their rehabilitation and recovery. They may be seeking resources to further their education. They may be seeking leisure and entertainment or computers and internet access. In other words, people with disabilities want what everybody else wants.
Right, Bunny. However, people with disabilities tend to be on a really tight budget. I think that oftentimes the library is their only point of access. It's important to make them feel like they actually belong. The library is a great place for that.
Well, excellent answers, ladies. So, Barbara, how do customers with mental illness look and act?
You know, I'm glad that you ask. People with mental illness may be exhibiting symptoms or odd behavior, yet are still able to use the library without too much disruption. Some people with mental illnesses appear different from the norm. However, others may look just like you and I.
You mentioned that you had some practical tips for improving customer service for patrons with disabilities. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
You bet. A great way to improve customer service is to increase your knowledge of mental illness and disability. With increased knowledge, your confidence and your comfort level will grow. You can attend trainings, read, or ask questions. One of my favorite stories about asking questions occurred in the grocery store with my 4-year-old son, Dylan. We met a lady there in a wheelchair, and he was naturally very curious about it, and he asked quite loudly why she was in a wheelchair. Now, instead of shushing him or ignoring the situation, I decided to take the opportunity to turn it into a teachable moment. So I said, I don't know. Why don't we ask her? So we did. And the lady very graciously explained why she had to use the wheelchair. And then she thanked me profusely for not ignoring her and speaking to her like she was a human being. Dylan wasn't the only person who learned something from that experience.
Well, what a story. It's true that asking questions is the best way to learn. Here are a few tips that I don't want to forget. Remember the golden rule. Treat others as you would like to be treated. Never ever judge a book by its cover. Treat the people like any other customer. Provide the same excellent customer service that you already provide. Don't make assumptions. Odd appearance or behavior doesn't predict functioning or ability. Remember that patrons with problems won't always be problem patrons. Be aware of any assistive technology the library has to offer and be ready to instruct people about how to use it. When experiencing communication difficulties, it's perfectly fine to say that you are having a hard time understanding. Many people with speech impairments become easier to understand the more you converse with them. It can be frustrating along the way, but at least you're trying.
Those are all good tips. Now, isn't it also important that staff understand the library's policies, especially the policies involving patron behavior?
Absolutely. And it's also crucial to be consistent in your application of the rules. Don't let your biases, positive or negative, influence the way you enforce behavior policy. If you do, that becomes discrimination.
True. What else?
Here are a few more tips. Always stick with library policies. Don't let sympathy impact your good judgment and influence you to bend the rules. That can be a slippery slope. You've got to have boundaries and set limits. Help customers understand what they can and cannot expect from the library. For instance, bathing isn't allowed in the restroom, but you could have that listing of community resources available for folks who might have that need.
Thank you, Barbara. Now, Bunny, can you tell our audience a little bit more about disability etiquette?
Sure. First, use a normal tone of voice. Just because someone is in a wheelchair doesn't mean they're deaf. Also, always treat adults in a manner befitting adults. Look at and speak directly to them, even if there's a caretaker or an interpreter present. Also, always offer your help with respect and sensitivity. Some people are very independent and they may decline your offer, but at least you offered.
Well, now I'd like to hear from some of our audience members about their successes in getting their libraries involved in the disabilities community. How have you made your libraries more welcoming to all customers? I know there's a lot of great ideas out there that the rest of us could learn from.
We have a situation in our library where a group home came to visit at the same time as we had a story hours scheduled. It was such a strain on our staff. And I don't think they were having that good of a library experience either, like they had just been kind of parked there. So we met with the administration of the group home and ended up setting up an adult story hour for them, and it's been so successful. A lot of our other branches have started similar programs.
Well, that certainly sounds like a great program. Talk about turning a challenge into an opportunity. I am impressed. Now, what else?
Hi, we started a local book club at our homeless shelter in the area. It was a wonderful experience. It really changed our opinion of the people once we got to know them.
That is so true.
Yes, so our library hosted a series of speakers in May during Mental Health Awareness Month. I was really surprised so many people attended. NAMI has a program called In Their Own Voices, and it's great for educating the public. 2 speakers shared their personal experiences about living with mental illness and achieving recovery.
I am always so impressed with Missouri librarians and libraries. Those are some excellent examples of how you can get your libraries involved. Now, Barbara, what are some other things libraries can do?
Libraries can observe special dates and awareness months with displays and programs. Libraries can also support people and educate the community through a strong collection of materials relating to the topics. Try partnering with the community and government organizations and see how you can help each other while fulfilling the library's mission. Be creative and try something new. talk to members of the disability community and ask them what they'd like to see in the way of programming and services. Any effort you make ultimately will overall improve customer service.
Well, thank you for joining us, Bunny and Barbara. It's always good to see you. And I'd like to thank members of our audience for attending today and for sharing all your great ideas and your questions with us. Public libraries are an essential resource for people with disabilities, and your assistance is particularly important to those customers. Library services can help everyone function at an optimum level. Attracting and welcoming all customers meets the library's mission. To all the librarian workers out there, your work enriches, educates, and informs. Thank you for all you do for the citizens of this state. This is Marian the Librarian signing off. I will see you in the library.